it was an article. I'm trying to remember where I saw this. I believe it was in the New York Times, but I could well be wrong. But in any case, I need to dig it out, print it out, and go through it. But here's the essence of it. The essence of this article was, and what this writer was asserting, is that we do not appropriately define what is public and what is private. It was in the New York Times, and Danielle just brought it to me. Thank you, Danielle. Our Mismeasured Economy by Lou Daly. And basically what he's saying is when we measure, through standard national accounting, GDP, gross domestic product, we break it out into public and private. Right? Here's how much of the activity in our economy was the result of government, and here's how much of the activity in our economy was the result of private industry. And it looks like, when you look at it that way, it looks like private industry is doing pretty much everything, and government is only 20% of our economy, and it's the Army, and it's, the infrastructure spending in the schools and some of our healthcare spending. But it's, it's about a fifth of our economy, but it's not all that. I mean, it's an expense. And what Lou Daly is suggesting in this op-ed, Our Mismeasured Economy, which was published on July 6th in the New York Times, is essentially, and these are my words, not his. It's a fairly wonky article, but I commend it to you. It's fairly easy to read. But basically what he was saying was, in my opinion, was we fail to capture or measure, and he says in at least 4 critical ways, the public value of our economy. So, for example, he says, we spend $2.3 trillion on social safety net programs. $2.3 trillion. Now, most of that goes to people who spend 100% of it in the private marketplace. So the $2.3 trillion is measured as government spending as part of the government share of it, but then those people go into their local store and they buy food or clothing or whatever, heating for their houses in the winter, air conditioning in the summer, whatever. And that's considered, quote, private, the private economy. Well, it wouldn't be there if they hadn't gotten the benefits from the public sector, from the government. So we're not measuring it properly. That $2.3 trillion, which is given to people at the bottom end of the wage scale, or at the bottom end of the economy, when they spend that money, should still be considered, this is the consequence of government doing something. Another one is that infrastructure doesn't get measured properly. He refers to research done by Robert Shapiro and Kevin Hassett. And they say that basically we spend $185 billion a year on infrastructure. And that's considered the public spending, government spending. But that because of that infrastructure, the private sector makes $800 billion, not $180 billion that it costs, but because of our roads, your trucking companies and Walmart and everybody else, they're all making money using our public road system. For just as one example, I would say that probably the number is much, much larger if you consider that much of the internet is public infrastructure, or at least certainly started out that way. In fact, Richard Eskow is making a case today over at well, I saw it on Alternet, but I think the original piece was on RJ's Richard's organization site, and what he's suggesting is that Google and I think it was Facebook, I could be wrong, but no, Google and Amazon, that they should be basically nationalized because they're making their money on infrastructure that we, the people, our government created. So anyhow, what he's saying is that we're not measuring these returns on public investment. We invest $185 billion in highways and in public infrastructure. The private sector then makes an $800 billion revenue on that, and that's considered all private. Well, it wouldn't exist if there hadn't been that $185 billion investment by the government. We're not measuring that. Another form of measurement that we're missing, he says, is the benefit of regulations. We're not measuring the benefit of regulations. Escos Group is the Campaign for America's Future, ourfuture.org. Thank you. He says, really, regulations should be considered a form of national savings, basically. We're protecting ourselves from, for example, being poisoned by Koch Industries. They don't like that, but we're protecting ourselves from that with regulation. And then he says, finally, there's the ever-expanding realm of non-capital market, including human, social, intellectual, and natural capital. None of that is measured. Now, that gets back to Bobby Kennedy's famous speech when he was running for president back in the 60s, where he said, GDP is a lousy way to measure the economy. GDP, gross domestic product, or GNP, gross national product, is what it used to be called. That's what he referred to it as. It measures, Speck's rifle, and, Richard Speck was a mass murderer down at the University of Texas, as I recall. There was a brilliant piece that Adbusters did, an ad that we used to run on this show years ago when it first came out, back in like 2004, 2005, that said every time a forest falls, GDP goes up. Every time there's an oil spill, GDP goes up. Every time someone's diagnosed with cancer, GDP goes up. And then they end by saying, economists must learn to subtract, right? These are not good things. But we use GDP as our standard. The flip side of that is we're not increasing GDP or our measurement of the public good by things like, hey, our people are better educated now. Or when they're poorly educated because of, Reagan's 32-year war on public education and young people going to college, we don't measure the decline in the asset base of America in our intellectual infrastructure. So we need to come up with a whole new way of looking at our economy.